What if, at the lowest moment of your life, 7 months pregnant, standing at your mother's
Sorry,
grave,
it has to
your
be this
husband
way.
chooses that exact second to destroy you, only to realize seconds later he just walked away from $500 million? In one brutal morning, Vanessa lost everything she thought mattered. But what they didn't know was that every betrayal had already been anticipated, every move quietly prepared, and every secret waiting to become a weapon. As the truth unfolds, lies shatter, masks fall, and karma strikes harder than anyone could imagine, proving that patience, not anger, is the most dangerous form of revenge. The lesson? Never underestimate a quiet woman who has nothing left to lose, because she might already be 10 steps ahead.
This is
If
where
this story
our
gave
story
you chills,
begins.
don't forget to like and share to support the channel. Every click gives us the motivation to bring you more powerful stories like this. Thanks for watching.
Imagine this. You are 7 months pregnant, and you are standing at your own mother's grave. In that exact moment, your husband chooses to serve you with divorce papers in front of every person you know. Now picture this. Just 30 seconds later, you find out your mother secretly left you $500 million, and your husband just threw it all away. This is the unbelievable story of Vanessa Lawson. In one single morning, she lost everything she thought was important, only to gain the power to destroy everyone who betrayed her. The most amazing part is that her mother had planned this entire revenge for 6 months before she ever passed away. Every move was calculated, every trap was hidden, every dark secret was a weapon waiting to be used. You are about to see how a grieving daughter turns the tables on her cheating husband, his greedy family, and a mistress faking a pregnancy. You will watch her rise from sobbing on a cold bathroom floor to masterminding the most public and humiliating downfall Atlanta had ever witnessed. She was about to prove that patience, not anger, is the deadliest weapon of all. But I have to warn you, this story has 3 huge twists that will leave you in complete shock. You will not see the end coming. If you enjoy stories where karma delivers justice and strong women refuse to be victims, then you are going to love this. Please go ahead and hit that like button so more people can find this story. Tell me in the comments if you would have done what Vanessa did. And make sure you subscribe because I promise you have never heard a story of vengeance quite like this one. Our story opens at the cemetery where one life ended and another one began. The rain had thankfully stopped just as Margaret Lawson's coffin was lowered into the red Georgia dirt. The historic Oakland Cemetery spread out over a large hill in Atlanta. Ancient oak trees created long shadows that fell across tombstones from as far back as the Civil War. About 30 mourners gathered in a small group near the newly dug grave. Their black clothing was a stark contrast to the gloomy November sky. Vanessa Lawson stood apart from the others. 7 months pregnant. She rested one hand on her round belly and held a crumpled, useless tissue in the other. Her face was hollow, drained by a grief so deep it felt like it had scooped everything else out of her. Just then, the baby kicked. A small reminder that life goes on, even when it feels like it cannot. The priest's words were a low hum in the background, talking about ashes to ashes and dust to dust. He was committing Margaret Lawson to God's care for all of eternity. Standing next to Vanessa, her husband David Reynolds checked his phone for the 3rd time in just 5 minutes. Vanessa noticed but decided not to say anything. Her husband of 2 years had been cold and distant for months, but today, she just needed him to be there with her. When she reached for his hand, it felt limp and uncaring inside her own. About 30 feet away, Linda and Robert Reynolds stood under a big black umbrella, even though it was not raining. They observed the funeral with strange expressions that did not fit the sad occasion. Linda's lips were turned up in a slight curve, not a real smile, but something that looked like deep satisfaction. Across the way, Vanessa saw a woman from David's office that she barely knew. The woman was pretending to wipe away tears with a tissue. Her name was Claudia. She had sent a card. Her hand was resting on her own belly, a familiar and protective gesture Vanessa recognized as early pregnancy. David's jaw tightened. He pulled his hand away from Vanessa's and reached inside his coat pocket. His movement was slow, deliberate, as if he had practiced it. He took out a large brown envelope that looked official and scary. "David?" Vanessa whispered, her voice trembling. "What is that?" He did not look at her. Instead, he turned and stood directly in front of her, blocking her view of her mother's casket. His eyes were cold and empty. There was no warmth, no memory of their life together, and no sign he remembered the baby she was carrying. "Vanessa," he said, his voice cutting through the priest's prayer like a knife. People turned to look. The priest stopped talking. A wave of confused murmurs spread through the crowd. He held the envelope out to her, and her hand shook as she took it. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Those are divorce papers," he stated calmly, as if he had memorized the words. "I've already signed my part." The ground seemed to drop out from under her. Vanessa stumbled back, and her best friend from college, Sarah Mitchell, grabbed her arm to steady her. Gasps rippled through the mourners. People started pulling out their phones. Someone was actually recording the whole thing. "What?" Vanessa's voice broke. "David, what are you talking about?" He looked past her toward the cars parked along the cemetery road. "It is finished," he said. "This marriage is over. It is for the best." "For the best." The words came out choked and breathless. "My mother is being buried at this very moment. I am carrying your child. You are doing this to me right here?" "I know the timing is not ideal," he replied, "but putting it off would have just made things harder." A small muscle jumped in his cheek. It was impossible to tell if it was from guilt or simple irritation. "You are a strong woman, Vanessa. You will land on your feet." Strong. He was calling her strong as he destroyed her entire world at her mother's funeral. Vanessa suddenly felt the weight of everyone's eyes on her. All 30 people were staring. Some looked horrified, but others had a different look, a mix of judgment and a terrible curiosity people get when they watch a disaster unfold. "Why?" Her voice was hollow. "Why are you doing this to me?" David adjusted his tie, still refusing to look at her. "Because I need you to know this is not a negotiation. I am with Claudia now." The name was like a slap in the face. "She is pregnant, and she needs my support." Vanessa felt her knees start to buckle. The co-worker, this woman whose name lit up his phone late at night, the one he had called her paranoid and insecure for even asking about. "You are leaving me while I am pregnant with your baby for another woman who is also pregnant with your baby? It is a complicated situation," he said, stuffing his hands in his pockets. He spoke as if he were discussing a business problem. "I do not expect you to understand it, but Claudia brings me joy. She makes me feel like I am really living." He paused, clearly searching for the most hurtful words he could find. "You just make me feel trapped." The whispers in the crowd got louder. Phones were raised higher to get a better video. The whole world would see this on social media in a matter of minutes. Everyone would know David Reynolds served his pregnant wife divorce papers while she was burying her mother. "You are making a terrible mistake," Vanessa said. Her voice had turned to ice, stronger than she ever knew it could be. "You have no idea what you have just done." David actually smirked, a look of pure pity and arrogance. "Oh, I know exactly what I am doing. I am choosing to be happy. You ought to try it." With that, he turned his back on her and walked away. There was no final hug, no apology, and no last look at the wife and family he was throwing away. His parents met him with proud nods, as if he had just done something heroic. Just then, a man in an expensive suit stepped forward. He was well-dressed, maybe in his 60s, and he held a briefcase that probably cost more than Vanessa's car. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said gently, "my name is James Morrison. I was your mother's lawyer. I must speak with you right away." "Not right now," Vanessa barely managed to say. "Please, I just cannot." "Your mother gave me very clear instructions." His voice was kind but firm. "She insisted that if anything were to happen, you had to know this immediately, before anyone else could make a move." He handed her a crisp, sealed envelope. Vanessa instantly recognized her mother's handwriting on the front. It simply said, "Open immediately." Her fingers trembled as she tore open the seal. Inside there was a single, formal-looking page. The words at the top were a blur until she saw the numbers. It was the last will and testament of Margaret Lawson. The total value of her estate was $500 million. The document slipped right through her numb fingers. David, who was now about 20 feet away, turned back around. Some gut feeling made him walk over and pick up the paper she had dropped. His eyes flew across the page, and all the color vanished from his face. $500 million. Linda Reynolds hurried over and snatched the will from her son's hand. As she read it, her smug expression completely fell apart. "This is impossible. Margaret was just a bookkeeper." "I do not understand," Vanessa said, looking up at James Morrison. "My mom worked for little companies. She lived in a tiny apartment. Her car was 15 years old. Where could this have come from?" "Your mother was a brilliant woman, Mrs. Reynolds." James's voice was clear and carried across the now completely silent cemetery. "She built an entire empire in secret, and she did it all to protect you." David looked from the will to Vanessa, and you could see the massive weight of his mistake crashing down on him. The sheer scale of his greed and stupidity was finally clear. "Wait a minute, Vanessa. We have to talk about this. I had no idea about—" But something in Vanessa's eyes had changed. For the first time, she saw him for who he really was. She saw the weakness, the lies, and the cold, selfish calculation behind everything he did. "You want to talk now?" Her voice was sharp as broken glass. "After you handed me divorce papers at my own mother's funeral? I had no idea there was any money," he said, his voice laced with desperation. "If I knew—" A new, steely resolve entered her voice. "If you had known what? You would only want me if I was wealthy?" David stumbled over his words. "No, that is not what I was trying to say." Vanessa retrieved the divorce papers from the ground. She pushed them back into his hands. "You wanted me to sign these, so now it is your turn." He stood there, frozen and completely bewildered. "You wanted out of this marriage, so you are out, and you will not touch a single cent of my mother's fortune." She then faced the lawyer. "Please make sure of that. Do whatever is necessary." James Morrison allowed a small, satisfied smile to appear. "Your mother already took care of it, ma'am," he informed her. "The prenuptial agreement his parents pushed for completely protects your inheritance. He has absolutely no claim to it." The expression on Linda's face was a masterpiece of horror. She was realizing that her own greed had just cost her son access to $500 million. Vanessa's voice then echoed through the quiet cemetery. "My mother's funeral service is over. Anyone who wishes to honor her memory is welcome to remain. If you are only here for the drama, you can leave now." She turned her back on David, walked over to Margaret's casket, and rested her hand on the polished wood. "I finally understand, Mom," she whispered quietly. "Thank you." 3 months before, their lives had been completely different. Vanessa and David were celebrating their second anniversary at a fancy restaurant. The room had dim lighting, and he enjoyed a glass of expensive wine while she had sparkling cider. But underneath the perfect scene, she felt a growing unease. "Is something wrong?" Vanessa asked, reaching for his hand. David's phone buzzed on the table again. He glanced down at the screen, which showed the name Claudia. He silenced the call without looking at her. "It is just work. You know how busy it gets." She did know, but she also knew that work calls did not usually demand that level of secrecy. 2 weeks later, on a Friday night around 9 o'clock, Vanessa stood holding a positive pregnancy test. Her hand was shaking with a mix of excitement and fear. She had planned to surprise David. She would later replay this exact moment in her mind, looking for all the red flags she had somehow missed. His smile never quite reached his eyes. His face showed something far from joy. It looked more like terror, or perhaps even anger. He said, That is wonderful, honey. Wow." The hug he gave her felt stiff and cold. As she stood in his arms, a small seed of doubt began to sprout in her heart. The very same week, Margaret met David's parents for the first time in her small, tidy apartment. She offered them tea, but Linda and Robert Reynolds refused to even sit down. It was a clear display of power. Vanessa noticed it but felt too intimidated to say a word. Linda's voice dripped with fake sweetness. She commented, "Margaret, it is so nice to finally see the little place where Vanessa grew up. It is so quaint." Margaret's response was polite but firm. "I have always believed in living a simple life. It helps avoid unnecessary complications." Robert scanned the room with a look of pure dismissal. I see. Very simple indeed." After they had gone, Margaret took Vanessa aside. "There is something not right about that boy. You need to be careful." Vanessa immediately jumped to his defense. "Mom, you do not even know him." "He is not like that when we are alone," Vanessa insisted. But her mother's eyes were filled with a deep sadness that came from a lifetime of experience. "Sweetheart, people do not change who they are at their core. They just reveal different parts of themselves. You need to be sure you know which part you married." The scene in the doctor's office was sterile and cold. Margaret sat across from a doctor who looked too young to be delivering such devastating news. "It is stage 4 pancreatic cancer," he said softly. "I'm very sorry, Margaret. You likely have 3 to 6 months, possibly less." Margaret absorbed the news with a surprising sense of calm. "How much time do I have before I cannot manage my own affairs?" "You will have good days and bad days," the doctor replied. "You might have 8 to 12 weeks where you will feel mostly sharp." Margaret simply nodded. "In that case, I have some work to do." The very next day, she had a meeting with her lawyer, James Morrison, and a private investigator named Michael Rivera. "I need you to look into my son-in-law, David Reynolds," she told them. "Something is wrong." James shifted in his chair, looking uncomfortable. "What makes you suspect something?" Margaret's voice was perfectly steady. "A mother just knows. I see the look on Vanessa's face when she thinks nobody is looking. She is not happy. She's just afraid of being unhappy. There is a huge difference." Detective Rivera leaned forward. "What are we searching for? Another woman? Financial trouble?" "Search for any sign that he is planning to leave her," Margaret instructed. "Because if he is, I want to make sure she has everything she needs to protect herself." The hospice room smelled of disinfectant and wilting bouquets. Margaret was lying in bed, looking incredibly frail, but her eyes were still sharp. Vanessa, now 6 months pregnant, was holding her mother's thin hand. "There is a key," Margaret said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it was full of urgency. "You will find it in my jewelry box. It is for safe deposit box 447 at First Atlanta Bank." Vanessa began to cry. "Mom, please do not talk like that." Margaret's grip tightened with unexpected force. "You need to listen to me. Everything you need is inside that box. Do not trust anyone unless they prove they deserve it. Protect yourself and protect my granddaughter." "How do you know the baby is a girl?" Vanessa asked between her tears. Margaret gave a faint smile. "A grandmother just knows. Promise me, Vanessa. Promise me that you will be strong." "I promise," Vanessa sobbed. "Show them what a Lawson woman is made of." Her mother's breathing grew shallow. "I love you more than—" The heart monitor let out a single, long, flat beep. The sound would haunt Vanessa for the rest of her life. She collapsed onto her mother's chest, her whole body shaking with grief. Behind her, David stood in the doorway, completely distracted by his phone. He was not really there, even in that final, terrible moment. The funeral took place just 2 days later. Everything Vanessa had feared and everything her mother had warned her about was about to become reality. It all fell apart in those devastating moments beside the grave. After David abandoned her, and after the lawyer shared the details of the will, the other mourners started to vanish. Some offered her hollow words of sympathy that felt more like insults. Others would not even make eye contact, as if his betrayal was some kind of contagious disease. Sarah Mitchell, a good friend still in her nursing scrubs, hurried through the crowd. She had driven straight from her shift at the hospital. "What on earth just happened?" she demanded. Vanessa was unable to speak. She was unable to cry. She could not feel a thing except the heavy weight of the baby inside her and a crushing, unbelievable new reality. In the course of a single morning, she had lost her entire world. "I have lost my mother and my husband," she finally managed to say, her voice empty. "He left me, right here, standing by my mom's grave." Sarah's eyes moved to the legal documents that James Morrison was still holding. Does this have to do with the money? I do not know, and I do not care, Vanessa whispered, feeling completely numb. My mother is dead. My marriage is gone. I just want to disappear. But disappearing was not an option. By the time Sarah drove Vanessa to the house she had once shared with David, it was already over. Her house key would no longer turn in the lock. He had already changed them. Through the large front window, Vanessa saw empty spaces where their furniture should have been. The walls were completely bare where their pictures used to hang. A single sheet of paper had been taped to the door. Vanessa, my attorney will contact you about splitting our assets. Do not try to reach me. You have until Friday to remove your personal belongings or they will be thrown out. David. Neighbors were watching from their porches, whispering to each other. One woman even walked over, pretending to be concerned. Oh, sweetie, we saw the moving truck here yesterday. Is everything all right with you two? Vanessa did not say a word. She simply walked back to Sarah's car, clinging to the last shred of her dignity. I have nowhere to go, she whispered. Sarah's voice was suddenly fierce and powerful. Yes, you do. You are coming home with me. Sarah's apartment was small and cluttered, but it felt like a safe haven. Vanessa sat on the pull-out couch and stared at the wall with a blank expression while Sarah prepared some tea. The television was on in the background, and a local news report was quickly going viral. Investment banker serves his wife divorce papers at her mother's funeral. They were playing a shaky cell phone video taken at the cemetery. A hashtag, divorced at funeral, was trending all over the internet. The comments were a flood of pure cruelty. She must have done something awful to deserve that. He looked so done with her. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. That poor baby is the only real victim here. Vanessa's phone buzzed over and over. She had 87 missed calls and more than 200 text messages. They were all like vultures, circling and hungry for the juicy details of her public humiliation. She placed a hand on her pregnant belly and whispered, I am so sorry. I have already failed you, and you have not even been born yet. Later that night, Sarah discovered Vanessa huddled on the cold bathroom floor. At 7 months pregnant, she was crying so uncontrollably that she could not even breathe. My mother is dead, she gasped between sobs. My husband left me. I'm about to be a homeless single mother. What am I supposed to do? Sarah sat on the floor beside her and wrapped her in a tight hug. You survive, Sarah said gently. That is what you do. You take one breath, and then you take the next one. I do not know how. Then I will breathe for both of us until you remember how to do it on your own. For 1 long hour, they sat together on the cold tile floor. The two women held on to each other, a silent defense against a world that had suddenly become so cruel. But they knew they had to find a way through this. Margaret Lawson did not build a legacy for 30 years only to see her daughter crumble. And somewhere, tucked away in a safe deposit box, was the key to her survival. This was not how Vanessa's story would end. It was the start of the greatest comeback the city of Atlanta would ever witness. That same night, David posted a picture on his Instagram account. It was a beautiful photo of a sunset, but the caption was disgusting. It said, sometimes you have to make hard choices to find your own happiness. #new beginnings. The post got 2,847 likes. The comments started flooding in. You are so brave, another said. You deserve all the happiness. One read, this is what a true man does. Just an hour later, his mistress Claudia shared her own photo. It was a picture of her hand resting on her very flat stomach. The caption read, life can surprise you in the most wonderful ways. #baby on the way, #finding love. Their online friends cheered for them. They praised them for being brave and following their hearts. Not a single person brought up the pregnant wife David had just left behind at her own mother's funeral. That part of the story ruined their perfect image. But the messages Vanessa saw were completely different. One called her a homewrecker. Another said, she is the one who pushed him away. A third message read, that gold digger finally got what was coming to her. And another one claimed, I am sure she is faking the pregnancy. Every single notification felt like a small knife wound to her heart. After a while, Sarah just took Vanessa's phone and turned it completely off. "You have to stop reading this poison," she pleaded. But the harm had already been done. 3 days after that, a formal letter arrived from David's attorney. It said, "Mrs. Reynolds, my client is hoping for a quick resolution to this marriage. If you choose not to cooperate, this will become a very long and painful legal fight. Your ability to be a good mother will be questioned in court. We strongly advise you to sign the documents we have included to prevent any more suffering. Sincerely, Mitchell and Stein, attorneys at law." Sarah stood behind Vanessa and read the letter with her. "They are threatening to take away your baby," she said, her voice shaking with pure rage. Vanessa felt nothing but a deep, hollow emptiness. "Maybe it is for the best," she whispered. "How can I be a good mother if I cannot even stand up for myself?" "You stop that kind of talk this instant," Sarah said, her tone suddenly sharp and protective. "You are in mourning. You are carrying a child. It is okay for you to feel broken for a little while. But what you are not allowed to do is give up." The following afternoon, Vanessa started looking through her mother's belongings. She was desperate to feel close to her, to find some piece of Margaret to hold on to. The jewelry box sat on Sarah's coffee table. It was mainly full of cheap costume jewelry with nothing valuable inside. But as she ran her hand along the bottom, she felt a tiny, almost invisible ridge. She had discovered a secret compartment. Inside were two things: a small brass key and an envelope. On the front, it said, "Vanessa, for emergency use only." Her hands trembled as she ripped it open. The letter started, "My dearest daughter, if you are holding this letter, it means I am no longer with you. I always prayed that you would never have to read this. But I understand how people can be. I know how they behave when they think someone is weak. This key belongs to safe deposit box number 447 at the First Atlanta Bank. Inside that box are documents that will completely change your life. For 30 years, I have been building something that nobody knows about. I built it to protect you for a moment exactly like this one." The letter continued, "Put your trust in James Morrison. He is aware of everything. Also, trust Detective Rivera. He has been keeping an eye on things, but do not trust anyone else until you are sure they have earned it. And always remember, patience is your greatest weapon. You must not react emotionally. You have to create a plan. I love you more than words can express. Now go and show them what a Lawson woman is truly capable of. Love, Mom." Vanessa read the letter 3 separate times. Each word had been chosen so carefully. Each step was perfectly clear. "I have to get to the bank," she declared. Sarah glanced at her watch. "It is already 6 o'clock in the evening. We can go first thing in the morning." Vanessa clutched the key tightly in her fist. "Will you go there with me?" "Of course I will," Sarah replied. But what do you imagine could be in there?" Sarah finally asked. Vanessa gazed down at the familiar shape of her mother's handwriting. "I honestly have no idea," she admitted. "But I know my mother never did anything unless she had a very important reason." The First Atlanta Bank was an impressive building, constructed from marble. It had towering columns and gave off an air of immense power. The room with the safe deposit boxes was cold, silent, and offered complete privacy. A bank worker carried box number 447 to them and then discreetly left the room. With a shaky hand, Vanessa slid the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying, solid click. She lifted the heavy metal lid. The box was filled with stacks of thick manila folders. They contained legal papers, bank records, and property titles. It was all proof of a secret life her mother had kept hidden for 3 decades. "Oh my goodness," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. Vanessa took out the first file. The label read Commercial Property, Atlanta Portfolio, and its total value was listed at $87 million. She picked up the next one, titled Tech Investments, which contained stock certificates worth a current total of $142 million. A third folder, labeled Private Equity, held assets valued at $94 million. She looked through page after page, deed after deed. It was an entire financial empire built in absolute secrecy. "How could this be possible?" Vanessa's voice was trembling. "My mother worked as a bookkeeper. She clipped coupons for groceries. She had a tiny apartment and drove a car that was older than me. At the very bottom of the box, she discovered one more letter. It said, "I imagine you are in a state of shock right now. That is good. Let that shock make you strong. Every last dollar is accounted for and legal. Every investment is documented and every single property is held in a family trust. You are the one and only beneficiary." David cannot lay claim to any of it. That prenuptial agreement his mother demanded you sign actually gives you all the protection you need. The irony is quite beautiful, is it not? James Morrison has been managing this for the past 20 years. Catherine Blake is my financial advisor. And Detective Rivera has been investigating David for the last 6 months. I started to suspect something was wrong a long time before I became ill. This box contains everything you need to fight back, the letter went on. But you have to remember this. Do not fight them with anger. You must fight them with intelligence. They believe they have destroyed you. For the time being, let them keep believing that. Love, Mom. Vanessa sat there in total, stunned silence. A full minute passed before Sarah gently placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "You should say something." A completely new look came into Vanessa's eyes. The grief was gone, replaced by pure determination. "My mother knew," she said quietly. "She knew he was going to do this." But how could she have possibly known that? Vanessa got to her feet, her hands now steady as she collected the papers. She did not know for certain, but she knew that someone, someday, might try to take advantage of me, so she made sure I would be ready to defend myself. Vanessa looked straight into Sarah's eyes. "And that is exactly what I am about to do." The law office of James Morrison was located on the 40th floor of a modern glass skyscraper that offered stunning views of Atlanta. The lawyer himself greeted them at the entrance with a smile that was both warm and professional. "Mrs. Reynolds," he began, "or perhaps I should call you Mrs. Lawson. Your mother mentioned that you might consider using your maiden name again." Vanessa simply answered, "I am still thinking about it." "Well," he responded, "no matter which name you choose, you are now one of the most wealthy women in the state of Georgia." He then displayed a presentation on a very large screen. It was filled with charts and graphs that laid out 30 years of incredibly successful investing. "Your mother dedicated 3 decades to building all of this," he told her. "She began with only $50,000. That money was an inheritance she received from her own mother," James explained. "And with smart and patient investing, she grew it into $500 million. "But her life was so simple," Vanessa said, confused. "Why did she keep all of this a secret?" "It was for your protection," he replied. "She observed how rich people were often used, manipulated, and became easy targets. She wanted you to have financial freedom without becoming a target yourself." He then switched to the next slide, which showed a series of very complicated legal trust diagrams. "Everything is held within a special trust, and you are the sole beneficiary. David has absolutely no legal claim to it, even though you were married at the time of your mother's death. The prenuptial agreement that his mother Linda pushed for specifically excludes any and all inheritance." Sarah spoke up, her voice soft with amazement. "So Linda actually protected Vanessa without having any idea she was doing it." James let a small, knowing smile appear. "Your mother Margaret liked to call that cosmic justice. They were so focused on protecting David's little trust fund that they completely shielded Vanessa's enormous inheritance by mistake." Vanessa then asked, "So what am I able to do with all of this?" "You can do almost anything you can imagine," James said. "The assets generate around $2.3 million of passive income every single month." He added, "You will never have to work again for the rest of your life." He paused for a moment, allowing the full impact of his statement to be felt. "Or," he went on, "you can use these resources to utterly ruin the people who tried to ruin you." James then slid a thick folder across the table. It was labeled Detective Rivera, Confidential. "Your mother hired Detective Rivera 6 months before she passed away. She had a feeling that something was not right with David, and her instincts were correct." He opened the folder, and photographs scattered across the polished conference table. One showed David and Claudia at a hotel back in October, which was 10 months ago. Another picture showed them in a restaurant in November, holding hands across the table. A third one showed them at her apartment building in December. A detailed spreadsheet laid out a timeline, providing clear proof that the affair had started nearly a whole year before the funeral. David claimed the affair was new, but that was a lie. Vanessa's hands trembled as she stared at the photographs. 10 months, she whispered to herself. He has been seeing her for 10 whole months. James, the investigator, handed her a stack of printed text messages. One from Claudia to a friend sent 8 months ago was circled. It read, "I think I found the perfect man." He is a wealthy investment banker from a good family, and he is completely unhappy in his marriage. He is a weak man, which makes him the perfect target. All I need to do is get pregnant, and he will be all mine. Or at least, his money will be. The friend wrote back, "Are you using the pregnancy trick again? Remember what happened in Vegas?" Claudia's reply was chilling. "I am much smarter this time. I found online tutorials for fake baby bumps and downloaded fake ultrasound apps. He will never have a clue." With every word Vanessa read, her expression became colder and harder. Detective Rivera discovered 7 other scams in Claudia's past. Her real name is actually Claudia Bennington, and there is a warrant for her arrest in Nevada for fraud. Vanessa looked up. Her eyes filled with disbelief. And David fell for all of it? "Men like your husband often believe what they want to believe," James explained. She gave him a way to leave his marriage without taking any of the blame, and he eagerly accepted it. He pulled more documents from the folder. One was a bank statement. It showed a wire transfer of $15,000 from Linda Reynolds to Claudia Foster dated 3 weeks before Margaret's funeral. The description simply said consulting fee his very own mother had paid her. "We also have the emails between Linda and Claudia," James added. "They planned the timing of the whole thing." James began reading from one of the printed emails. It was from Linda to Claudia. She wrote, "The funeral is the ideal time to do it. Vanessa will be so overwhelmed with sadness that she will not be able to fight you. Just make sure David does not get scared and change his mind." At that moment, something inside of Vanessa finally snapped. It was not her will to go on. It was the very last shred of hope that this had all been a terrible, unplanned mistake, and not an act of pure, calculated evil. "They actually planned to do this to me at my own mother's grave," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Sarah, her best friend, was furious. "This is more than an affair. This is a criminal conspiracy." "It certainly is prosecutable," James confirmed. "If you decide you want to press charges." Vanessa gently closed the folder. "Not right now," she said calmly. "My mother always taught me to fight smart, not to fight angry." She looked directly at James. "What other information do you have for me?" Her next stop was a luxurious office with a stunning view of Peachtree Street. Catherine Blake, a woman of 42 who looked as sharp as a razor, was studying Vanessa's financial portfolio across several large computer screens. "Your mother was one of the most brilliant clients I have ever worked with," Catherine said without looking up. She understood a concept that most people never grasp. True wealth is not about how much money you spend. It is about how much leverage you have. "I'm not sure I understand what that means," Vanessa confessed. "It means that money gives you power," Catherine explained, a glint in her eye, "but only if you use it intelligently. Your mother spent years building this entire fortune just to protect you. And now," Catherine went on, "we are going to use it to make the people who betrayed you fully understand what a huge mistake they made." Sarah shifted in her seat, looking a little uneasy. "Are you suggesting we get some kind of revenge?" "I like to call it delivering consequences," Catherine replied with a thin smile. "But first, we need a solid plan." She brought up a presentation on the screen that showed 3 different options. Option 1 is that you disappear. You take the money and live a quiet, comfortable life, and David will never know about the fortune he walked away from. Option 2 is that we go public immediately. We create a massive, sudden shock that will demolish his reputation in a single day. Catherine's smile widened. And then we have option 3, which was always your mother's preferred strategy. You slowly and carefully build up your public profile. You let him see small, confusing glimpses of your new, successful life. You will make him absolutely crazy trying to figure out where all of this money came from, Catherine continued. Then, at the very moment he is most confused and feeling his most insecure, we reveal everything all at once, in one single, crushing blow. But why would we wait so long? Vanessa asked. Because a big reveal with no buildup is just a piece of gossip. But if you spend the next few months becoming a respected, admired, and well-known member of Atlanta's high society, joining charity boards, making large donations, being seen with the mayor, then when we expose what David did, it will not be just gossip. It will be major news. She paused for dramatic effect. And news always travels much farther and faster than simple gossip ever could. A wave of understanding washed over Vanessa. My mother planned out every single step of this. She created the entire playbook for you, Catherine confirmed. But you are the one who has to decide if you want to run the plays. Vanessa glanced over at Sarah, who gave her a slow, deliberate nod. I will stand by you no matter what you choose to do, Sarah said. But if I am being completely honest, I would love to watch them go down in flames. Vanessa turned her attention back to Catherine. Tell me precisely what we need to do. The following 6 weeks were a blur of constant activity and transformation. Vanessa, who was now 8 months pregnant, worked closely with Catherine to create a public image that would make David Reynolds question his entire reality. A personal shopper at a very exclusive department store helped her choose a wardrobe of designer maternity clothes. We do not want anything too flashy, Catherine had advised. We are going for quiet, classic elegance. You are done with hiding. It is time to own who you are. A top professional stylist worked magic on Vanessa's hair. It was not a huge, dramatic change, but the difference it made was incredible. She looked like she had serious money, like she came from an old, established family with the kind of wealth that never needs to show off. Her very first public appearance was at a charity luncheon for the local children's hospital. When Vanessa entered the grand ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton, conversations literally came to a halt. 800 guests, the vast majority of whom had never seen her before, watched as she was escorted to a VIP table right near the stage. She wrote out a check for $500,000 and made certain the donation was announced over the microphone. The society columnist for the Atlanta newspaper took pictures of the entire thing. The other guests immediately began to whisper, "Who is that woman?" I think I heard she is Margaret Lawson's daughter. You mean Margaret the bookkeeper? How on earth could she have that kind of money? The whispers were a calculated part of Catherine's plan. They were questions that had no immediate answers, which created a sense of mystery that people were desperate to solve. Over the next month, Vanessa was spotted at 3 more high-profile events. A gallery opening where she purchased a painting for $75,000, and a board meeting for a women's shelter where she gave a speech about overcoming feelings of being powerless. She was even a guest at a breakfast with the mayor, where her assigned seat was just 2 chairs away from the president of the city council. The society columns in the newspapers began to feature her photograph with headlines like, "Mysterious Philanthropist Makes Her Debut," "A New Face in Atlanta's Elite Society," and "The Woman Everyone is Talking About." At the mayor's biggest charity luncheon of the year, 800 guests were crowded into the Ritz-Carlton ballroom. Vanessa made her entrance at the perfect time and was shown to a VIP table near the front of the room. She took her seat next to Marcus Cameron, a tech billionaire whose company her mother had invested in many years before. On the other side of the room, Linda Reynolds was sitting with her friends from the country club. Linda's fork froze halfway to her mouth the moment she saw Vanessa. "Please excuse me," Linda said to her friends through a tight jaw. She marched over to Vanessa's table with a fake smile stretched across her face. "Vanessa," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "this is certainly a surprise." Vanessa looked up at her, her expression calm and pleasant. "Hello there, Linda. How have you been?" Linda's eyes quickly scanned Vanessa's expensive designer dress and her jewelry, which looked real for the simple reason that it was. "I am confused," Linda said, lowering her voice. "I am very confused. What exactly are you doing at this event?" "I was invited," Vanessa answered plainly. "I am one of the donors." "And where's all this money coming from?" Linda hissed. "Your mother was nothing more than a bookkeeper." Vanessa smiled a slow, knowing smile. "My mother was a lot of things that most people never understood. It seems I inherited much more than just her old furniture. Vanessa then turned her full attention back to Marcus Cameron, dismissing Linda completely. Was there something else you needed, Linda? I have other people I need to speak with. Linda's face contorted with anger, realizing she was losing the control she thought she had. David mentioned your mother's inheritance. We are having our lawyers look into it. Look all you want. Vanessa's voice was still calm and sweet. Everything is perfectly legal. Everything is fully documented, and all of it belongs to me now. She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. Give David my best regards. Or do not. To be honest, I really do not care anymore. Vanessa turned and walked away, leaving Linda standing there, completely defeated. Linda returned to her table with her hands shaking. David's temporary apartment was small and had no personality. It was a major downgrade from the beautiful home he had once shared with Vanessa. He was pacing nervously back and forth while he talked to his mother on the phone. She was at the mayor's luncheon, sitting with Marcus Cameron and the president of the city council. What in the world is happening? I have no idea. Linda's voice sounded faint over the speaker. But we need to find out where she got all that money. What if Margaret's assets were not acquired legally? Do you think she could have been laundering dirty money or something like that? I think we need to look into every single possibility, Linda replied. Your father is on the phone with our accountant this very minute. Just then, Claudia came out of the bedroom. She was wearing loose, baggy clothing and had one hand resting on her flat stomach. She was supposed to be 4.5 months pregnant by this point, but there was no visible baby bump. What is wrong? She asked. It is Vanessa, David said. She is all over social media, donating hundreds of thousands of dollars and attending all these huge events. Everyone is talking about her. I thought you told me that her mother did not have any money. That is what I thought too. David's voice grew louder with frustration. But it turns out she had millions. It could be worth hundreds of millions. And I had signed away all my rights. A calculating glimmer appeared in Claudia's eyes. Her simple little plan had suddenly become much more complicated. She cooed, well, you have me now, and you have our baby. That is all that matters. For the very first time, David actually looked down at her stomach. When is your next appointment with the doctor? Next week, she said. Why do you ask? I want to come with you. He replied. Baby, I already explained. My doctor prefers... His voice became cold and unyielding. I do not care what your doctor prefers. I am going. Claudia swallowed nervously, feeling cornered. Then, an email from James Morrison landed in her inbox at the perfect time. It said, David's attorney wants to set up a meeting. They are hoping to discuss a quick settlement. Vanessa was sitting across from James in his office. What exactly does that mean? It means he wants to end this divorce as quickly as he can. He is offering you full custody, no child support payments from you, just a complete and clean break. Sarah, who sat beside Vanessa, sounded overjoyed. That is everything you wanted from the beginning. Why is he doing this now? Vanessa asked, her voice full of suspicion. He sees the new you in public and finally understands what he has lost. He wants to finalize this before you can use the divorce to reveal even more about him. Catherine's face then popped up on the video monitor. You should accept the offer. This is a much better outcome than dragging him through the court system. Vanessa considered it for a moment. Do you honestly think so? You get to keep Grace, you get your independence, and you can build a new life without him in it at all. Sometimes victory is not about crushing your opponent. It is about walking away with what is truly important. Sarah nodded, agreeing. She is right. You have already won, V. Just accept your victory. For the first time in many weeks, a feeling of deep relief washed over Vanessa. Okay, I will accept the settlement. Let us finally put an end to this. That night, Vanessa and Sarah celebrated at the estate. Vanessa had finally moved into her mother's real home. The house was tucked away behind tall gates and ancient oak trees. It had 6 bedrooms and a library that smelled like old leather and deep wisdom. The garden seemed to stretch out for miles and miles. Sarah lifted her glass of sparkling cider. To Margaret, who planned every last detail with perfect precision. Vanessa clinked her glass against Sarah's. To Mom. And to finally being free of David Reynolds for good. They both took a sip. Vanessa felt an emotion she had not felt in months. It was peace, or something very much like it. Maybe I do not need a grand plan for revenge. Maybe this is all I need. I have my baby coming, I have money, and I have my freedom. You sound like a weight has been lifted. I feel it. I just want to move forward, begin to heal, and concentrate on being a good mother. Her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from James. The settlement documents are prepared for you to sign in the morning. Vanessa looked at Sarah and smiled. It is finally over. She walked toward the fireplace where she had placed the folders filled with evidence. They contained all the pictures, the text messages, and the proof of his cheating. She pulled them out. I do not need these any longer. Sarah looked concerned. Are you certain? Once you get rid of them, they are gone forever. I am certain. I need to let go of the anger. I need to stop wanting to get even. I need to heal. She placed the folders on the coffee table and began shredding the papers into the recycling bin. What Sarah did not realize was that these were only copies. The original files were secured in a vault at James's office, but Vanessa put on a big show of shredding the documents, knowing that the news would eventually find its way back to David. Her mother had taught her very well. You should never destroy your only advantage. But there are times when you must make your enemy believe that you have. The Reynolds family home appeared completely normal from the outside, but on the inside, Linda, Robert, and a highly skilled forensic accountant were examining papers spread across the dining room table. Margaret Lawson's tax records from 15 years ago show some discrepancies, the accountant stated cautiously. Robert leaned in for a closer look. What kind of discrepancies? The capital gains she declared do not match up with the assets she bought in the following years. It is a possibility. It is possible she was concealing other sources of income. A predatory expression appeared on Linda's face. Tax evasion. I am not saying that for certain, but there is enough here to spark an Internal Revenue Service investigation if an anonymous complaint were to be filed. Linda glanced at Robert. Do it. If it turns out we are wrong, then we are wrong. But I do not think we will be. And even if we are, an investigation will freeze every single one of her accounts for months, possibly for years. That is more than enough time for David to file for custody before she has the funds to put up a fight. The alert appeared on Vanessa's phone 3 days later. Local philanthropist is under federal investigation. The Internal Revenue Service begins inquiry into the Margaret Lawson estate. Her blood ran cold. News reports began to flood in. People started to question the origins of Vanessa Lawson's fortune. An anonymous tip triggers a tax fraud investigation. Did the deceased bookkeeper fail to pay millions of dollars in taxes? Social media erupted with comments. I always knew something was off. It is likely from drugs or some kind of fraud. She always appeared too perfect to be true. Within hours, the phone calls began. The chairman of the charity board was apologetic, but his message was clear. Vanessa, we are going to have to ask you to step down until this situation is resolved. It is only temporary, of course, to protect the organization's reputation. But I have not done anything wrong, and neither did my mother. I believe you. But public opinion is what we have to consider right now. I am truly sorry. 3 more calls followed, each carrying the same news. All of her positions on the boards of charities were suspended. James Morrison arrived at Vanessa's estate the next morning, his face grave and serious. David has pulled the settlement offer. He has filed an emergency motion. He passed her the legal documents. Vanessa's hands trembled as she read them. He is alleging that your inheritance was acquired through illegal means. He is demanding full custody of the baby, and you would be granted only supervised visits. On what basis can he do that? He is claiming that you are benefiting from the proceeds of tax fraud, and therefore you would provide an unfit home for a child. The hearing is set for 2 weeks from today, which is right after your due date. Sarah leaped from her chair, her face filled with rage. They set this up. They waited until she was about to have the baby. The judge has also signed a temporary order. If the baby is born before the custody hearing, Child Protective Services will take the infant and place her in temporary foster care until the hearing concludes. Vanessa felt as if her entire world was collapsing around her. They are going to take my baby. They are going to take my Grace. We will fight them. But the Internal Revenue Service investigation makes everything extremely difficult. Federal inquiries can take anywhere from 6 to 12 months. During that period, my daughter will be in a foster home. She struggled to breathe. She was 8.5 months pregnant, trapped by legal papers that threatened to steal her child before she even had a chance to hold her. That night, Vanessa sat by herself in her bedroom, 8.5 months pregnant. Legal papers were scattered across the floor all around her. Everything was falling apart once more, but this time it was so much worse. She reached for her phone. David's number was still saved in her contacts. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Maybe if she just surrendered the money, signed it all away to them, then maybe they would allow her to keep her own baby. Maybe that is the choice a good mother would make. To protect her child, no matter what it cost. She looked at the picture on her bedside table. It was Margaret, holding her as a newborn. Her mother's eyes seemed to be looking directly at her. "What would you do, Mom?" Then she saw something tucked behind the picture frame. It was a different envelope with a message written on the front. "If they ever come after you legally." Her hands shook as she ripped it open. Inside were official clearance letters from the Internal Revenue Service, dated 15 years in the past. Every last penny had been accounted for. There was also a handwritten note from Margaret. I had a feeling they would attempt something like this. "A tax lawyer by the name of David Sheffield has copies of every document. Call him right away." There was another note, and I discovered something about them as well. "Only use this if it is an absolute emergency." Vanessa quickly grabbed her phone and dialed the number. "Mrs. Lawson." The lawyer's voice was calm and reassuring. "Your mother retained my services 10 years ago for this exact possibility. Can you make the investigation stop?" The Internal Revenue Service is required to investigate once a formal complaint has been submitted. However, I can accelerate the process with the documents that I have. We can get this cleared up in 4 to 6 weeks instead of many months. That is not quick enough. The custody hearing is in just 2 weeks. But I am able to file for an emergency stay of the custody case. The family court judge is not allowed to make a decision about an unfit environment while the investigation is ongoing and you have not been formally charged with anything. Vanessa took a deep breath, the first one she had taken in hours. "There is another matter," Sheffield continued. "Your mother's own investigation into the Reynolds family also revealed some discrepancies. Robert Reynolds is in charge of the Reynolds Family Charitable Foundation. Over the past 8 years, he has secretly taken $2.3 million from it. He used fake payments to contractors, phantom employees, and shell corporations. Can we actually prove this? Your mother already has. We have the bank records, the tax filings, and statements from former employees who are willing to testify. It has all been documented." He paused for a moment. "She did not want you to use this information unless it was completely necessary. She believed that fighting dirty should only be a last resort." Vanessa's voice turned as cold as ice. "They tried to take my baby from me. It is necessary." Vanessa's living room transformed into a command center the very next morning. A war council was in session. James Morrison and Catherine Blake appeared on a large screen through a video call. The tax attorney, David Sheffield, was a voice on the speakerphone. While Sarah paced nervously near the windows, Detective Michael Rivera was there in person. Rivera was a man in his mid-40s who carried the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years investigating financial crimes. He set down several thick folders onto the coffee table. "I have been digging into this for 8 months. This is what we have found," he said as he opened the files. "The relationship between David and Claudia began 10 months before the funeral. This was all planned, documented, and there is no denying it," he went on. "Claudia Bennington has 7 prior fraud charges in 3 different states and uses 5 different names. She is a career con artist." Linda Reynolds sent Claudia $15,000 3 weeks before the funeral. The note on the wire transfer clearly stated consulting fee. Robert Reynolds embezzled $2.3 million from his own family's charity over a period of 8 years, and the complaint to the Internal Revenue Service against Margaret's estate was filed from a computer inside Linda Reynolds' house. We were able to trace the IP address. That is called filing a false federal report, and it is a serious crime. Vanessa absorbed every word. So we can get them on multiple charges. That is correct, Rivera confirmed. But we have run into a problem. What kind of problem? Vanessa asked, her heart sinking. The judge who was assigned to your custody case is Judge Patricia Morgan. She and Linda Reynolds are friends who play golf together every single week. Sarah's voice erupted with fury. That is a clear case of judicial bias. She has to remove herself from this case. James shook his head on the screen. She's not going to do that without a lot of pressure. And if we file a complaint, it will take weeks, and we do not have weeks. Catherine's voice cut through the speakers. In that case, we will not use her courtroom. All eyes turned to the monitor. What are you trying to say? We are going to hold our own trial in the court of public opinion at the gala, she announced. Vanessa looked completely lost. What gala? The Margaret Lawson Foundation inaugural gala. The event is scheduled for 3 days after your due date, Catherine clarified. There will be 800 guests in attendance, and every major news station in Atlanta has been invited to cover it. The entire event will be live-streamed to an audience of more than 50,000 people. James looked unconvinced. We cannot simply present legal evidence at a charity fundraiser. No, Rivera said, leaning forward with intensity, but I can. If I submit all of this evidence to the district attorney's office first, making sure I follow all the proper procedures, and then we release it to the public at the gala, it is not taking the law into our own hands. It is just being transparent. The idea finally clicked for Vanessa. We expose them in front of everyone, and then the arrests happen. Precisely, Catherine said. And with that much public scrutiny, Judge Morgan will have no choice but to be fair. Her every move will be watched. But the custody hearing is scheduled to happen before the gala, Vanessa reminded them. James looked her directly in the eye. Then you will not be there. A thick silence fell over the room. If you do not show up for the hearing, the judge is required to reschedule it, he explained. That will buy us 2 weeks. That gives us enough time to make everything public before you have to go to court. But that is contempt of court, Sarah argued. Yes, it is, James acknowledged. You could be arrested for it, but I would much rather see you get arrested after the truth is revealed than watch you lose grace before we even get a chance to fight back. Vanessa looked around the room at her team, which was really her mother's team. These were the very people her mother had assembled to keep her daughter safe when she was no longer able to. So I am risking going to jail. You are risking a contempt charge, Rivera corrected her gently. That usually results in a fine or maybe probation. But you will not lose your daughter. If the district attorney's office agrees to move forward, and with this much evidence they will, then warrants for their arrest will be issued. We will time the arrests to have the greatest possible impact at the gala with all the cameras rolling. Vanessa placed a protective hand on her stomach. Grace gave a kick, as if she was casting her vote. My mother planned for every bit of this. Catherine nodded. She provided you with all the weapons, but you are the one who has to decide whether you are going to use them. A long, quiet moment passed as Vanessa thought through every single risk and every possible result. Let us do it, she finally declared, standing up with her hand on her belly. Set up the gala, the meeting with the district attorney, all of it. They tried to take my baby from me. Now they are going to find out what happens when you threaten a child of a Lawson woman. Her labor started on a Thursday morning, 3 days past her due date. After 7 long hours of pain, with Sarah coaching her through every single contraction, Vanessa gasped, What if they take her away? What if this is the only time I ever get to hold her? That is not going to happen, Sarah said with absolute certainty. We have a plan. But plans fail. What if our plan fails? Sarah took her hand, her grip surprisingly strong. You need to listen to me. You are the daughter of Margaret Lawson. You are so much more powerful than they can possibly comprehend. You are going to hold on to your baby, and you are going to fight for her with everything you have inside you. After one last final push, the sound of a baby's cry echoed through the room. It is a girl. They gently placed the tiny, perfect infant on Vanessa's chest. Grace was crying with a pair of healthy lungs, but she immediately went quiet the moment she heard her mother's voice. She opened her eyes. "Hello, Grace. Hello, my baby girl. I am your mommy. And I give you my word, I promise you, no one is ever going to take you away from me." The following day, David was standing outside the nursery. He was staring through the large glass window at baby Grace. A security guard refused to let him enter the room because Vanessa had given strict orders. His face held an expression that Vanessa had not seen on him in months. It was genuine emotion. It was as if something inside of him was shattering as he laid eyes on his daughter for the very first time. He called Vanessa's hospital room. "What do you want, David?" I saw her through the window," he said, his voice thick with feeling. "She is so beautiful." "Is that the only reason you called? To tell me my baby is beautiful?" "I called to tell you that I made a mistake," he confessed. "The single biggest mistake of my entire life. And I really want to be a father. Can we please just talk?" Vanessa looked down at Grace, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms. "You can come tomorrow. Visiting hours are between 10 and 8. "Are you serious?" he asked, sounding surprised. "Yes. But David, if you are planning to come here to threaten me, or to try and manipulate me, or to make another attempt to take her, then you should not even bother coming." "I will not. I really just want to meet my daughter." After she ended the call, Sarah looked at her with a confused expression. "Are you really going to let him visit?" "No," Vanessa said calmly. "But I need him to believe that I am. I want him to arrive here tomorrow only to discover that I am already gone. I want him to understand exactly how it feels when someone you care about simply vanishes." Sarah broke into a smile. "You truly are your mother's daughter." "You are damn right I am." The custody hearing was held without Vanessa present. Judge Patricia Morgan presided from the bench. David and his lawyer were both there. Claudia sat right next to him, wearing a dress designed to conceal her supposed 6-month baby bump. Vanessa's chair remained empty. "Counsel, where's your client?" the judge demanded. James Morrison rose to his feet. "Your Honor, Mrs. Lawson gave birth 48 hours ago and is currently experiencing some postpartum complications. We are requesting a continuance." David's lawyer immediately spoke up. "Your Honor, this is obviously a strategy to stall the proceedings. We are moving for an immediate—" "I am granting a 2-week continuance," the judge cut him off. "But let it be known, Mrs. Lawson, if you do not appear next time, I will issue a warrant for your arrest." The sound of the gavel echoed in the room. David looked completely terrified, finally understanding that he was no longer in control of the situation. A news alert was sent out later that afternoon. The Internal Revenue Service had officially closed its investigation into the Lawson estate, having found no evidence of wrongdoing. The anonymous tip was determined to be both malicious and without any basis in fact. The tone of the media coverage shifted immediately. The philanthropist's good name was cleared of every allegation. The public was now aware of the false accusations that had been made against a grieving mother. Public opinion swung overwhelmingly back to Vanessa's side. The story that David and his family had so carefully tried to build was now completely unraveling. 3 days after that, David appeared at Vanessa's estate. Security called her to get permission first. Vanessa, who was recovering from giving birth and looking remarkably strong, consented to see him. He entered the living room carrying a large bouquet of flowers. He looked broken in a way she had never witnessed before. Sarah remained close by her side, and a security guard stood watch at the door. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," he began. Vanessa's voice was like ice. "You have 10 minutes. He approached her slowly, his gaze locked on the tiny baby she held in her arms. Tears began to form in his eyes. Is it okay if I hold her?" Vanessa hesitated for only a second, then gave a slight nod. She gently transferred Grace into his arms, carefully watching his expression as he held his daughter for the very first time. David completely fell apart, crying uncontrollably. "She is perfect. Oh my God, she is just so perfect." "Yes, she is," Vanessa calmly agreed. He looked up at Vanessa, his eyes filled with tears. "I was so wrong about all of it," he admitted. About Claudia, about my mother, the divorce, every single part of it. I was weak and selfish and just plain cruel. Yes, you were, Vanessa replied bluntly. Her straightforward agreement seemed to take him by surprise. I know that I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I am asking for it anyway. For Grace's sake, she deserves to have her father in her life. Vanessa just watched him as he held their daughter. She could see true regret in his eyes. She caught a tiny glimpse of the man she had loved once, buried deep down beneath all of his terrible choices. What about Claudia? She asked him directly. That is over. I ended it. I finally saw her for who she really is. I saw all of them for who they are, my mother, my father, everyone. He used me, Vanessa said, her voice tight with anger. He used you, and he used our marriage like a weapon. After a moment, he continued, I am determined to fix this, no matter how much time it takes. Sarah shot Vanessa a look that screamed caution, but Vanessa could feel her own resolve starting to crack. What exactly are you proposing? He asked. Let's try couples counseling, David offered. A chance for us to learn to trust each other again. I am not asking for marriage, not right now, but maybe we can raise our child together. I want to have a real bond with Grace. He carefully placed the baby back into Vanessa's arms. I will sign any document you want. I will give you anything you ask for. I just want to be a part of her life, and a part of your life if you'll have me. Vanessa looked from baby Grace's face back to David's. I need some time to think about this, she said. Of course, he replied. Take all the time you need. He got up as if to leave, but then he hesitated and turned back. Vanessa, I am so sorry for all of it, especially for my behavior at your mother's grave. There is no excuse for what I did, but I promise to spend the rest of my days trying to earn your forgiveness. The moment he was gone, Sarah spoke. V, you cannot possibly be thinking about agreeing to this. Grace has a right to know her father, Vanessa answered quietly. And maybe he has changed. It is possible he is really trying. Or it is possible this is just one more of his games, Sarah warned. Maybe, Vanessa conceded. But for my daughter's sake, I feel like I have to find out. In the 2 weeks that followed, David was a constant presence at the estate. They attended counseling sessions where he accepted all the blame for his past mistakes. He had visits where he would play with Grace for hours while Vanessa watched him like a hawk. They even started having family dinners together that felt surprisingly normal. After a while, he moved into the guest house, staying in a separate building, to show he respected her boundaries. The news stories about them were all positive, focusing on how they were coming back together for their baby. The public absolutely loved the story of a family healing from betrayal and finding a second chance. For the first time in what felt like forever, Vanessa felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe her happy ending was not about getting even. Maybe it was just about healing. One night, as they sat together in the library, David proposed an idea that would turn out to be his biggest mistake. What if we just ask the court to drop the case entirely? He suggested. We could agree to joint custody. No more lawyers, no more judges. Just the two of us working it out. Are you serious? Vanessa asked, surprised. I am done fighting with you, V, he said softly. All I want is to be a father. A huge wave of relief washed over her. Okay, she said, a small smile forming. Let's do it. They shook hands to seal the deal. David then pulled her into a hug, and this time she did not pull away. She felt the heavy burden of the past few months finally start to disappear. After he went back to the guest house, Vanessa stared at the folder of evidence she had kept hidden in the library. These were the original documents, not the copies she had destroyed. Maybe it was finally time to let go of all that anger. Maybe she did not need these papers anymore. Just then, Sarah came in and saw Vanessa looking at the folder. Are you really sure about this? Sarah asked. I am, Vanessa answered with confidence. Grace is happy and healthy, David is working hard to be a good dad, and the custody battle is over. This is everything I ever wanted. She then theatrically pulled a few sheets from the folder and began feeding them into the shredder. It was all an act, a show meant for an audience of one. She left the small pile of shredded paper right where David would see it, as proof that she was truly moving on. But the rest of the evidence, the most important parts, was still tucked away safely. Her mother had always told her, trust, but always verify. 3 days later, that simple piece of advice would save her entire world. Vanessa brought a dinner tray over to the guest house where David was staying. She was playing her part perfectly, acting kind and building his trust. He was in the shower when she arrived, but his phone was sitting right on the kitchen counter. Suddenly, it lit up. A new text from his mother, Linda, flashed on the screen. Phase 2 is done. Did she get rid of the evidence? We start Phase 3 on Friday at 2 in the afternoon. Judge Morgan is confirmed. Vanessa's blood ran cold. Her hands shook as she reached for the phone and opened the message application. The entire horrible conversation between Linda and David was right there, spelling out their whole plan. Has she destroyed those investigation files? Linda had written. David's response was sickening. Not yet. I am still working to get her to trust me. I think she is starting to believe me. Linda's following message was sharp and demanding. You need to work faster. We have to have those files gone before the charity gala. David seemed to have a moment of guilt. I feel terrible about this. Lying to her face again. She is trying so hard to forgive me. But Linda was completely heartless. Do you want your daughter or not? Do you want access to all that money? Stop being so sentimental. David's reply came a few seconds later. I know, you are right. Linda then described the final piece of their evil plan. As soon as she destroys that evidence, we file for emergency custody. Dr. Peterson will testify that she is suffering from postpartum depression. Judge Morgan will grant us custody immediately, David then asked. And after that? Linda's answer sealed his fate. After that, you get grace. And through the child support payments, you get your hands on Vanessa's fortune, just like we planned all along. Vanessa's hand trembled as she continued to scroll through the messages. She saw pictures of David meeting with a woman named Claudia at a cafe just the day before. The texts between them were even more shocking. Claudia had sent a message saying, "Miss me yet?" David had replied, "This is strictly business. Once this is all over, we split the money." Claudia's response was greedy. 50-50, just like we decided. David's text confirmed it. Yes, I just have to get custody of the child first. There was also a group chat with David, Linda, and another man named Robert. Robert had written, "The fake postpartum diagnosis is ready to go. Dr. Peterson owes me a big favor after that incident at the country club." Linda had asked about the judge. Robert's reply was smug. Judge Morgan will rule for David. I have already taken care of it. David seemed worried. What about the gala? What if she tries to expose us there? Linda's message showed she had thought of everything. Without those evidence files, it will just be her word against all of ours. No one is going to believe her, and by that point, we will already have grace. The water in the shower turned off. In a panic, Vanessa quickly placed the phone back on the counter, exactly where she had found it. David came out of the bathroom with a towel around his waist. "Hey," he said with a smile. "I did not even hear you come in." Vanessa's heart was hammering against her ribs, but she kept her voice perfectly calm. "I just dropped off some dinner for you. I will let you eat in peace." She walked out of the guest house, made it back to the main house, and securely locked the door. Only then did she finally fall apart, letting out a silent scream of pure pain. Sarah ran to her side. "What is wrong? What happened?" Without saying a single word, Vanessa showed her the picture she had secretly taken of David's phone. "It was all a lie," Vanessa whispered, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "Every single apology, every tear, every moment he spent with Grace. It was all a performance just to make me destroy the evidence." Sarah stared at the phone screen, her shock turning to fury with each message she read. "Oh my goodness. And I almost fell for it. I almost encouraged you to shred the real documents." In her nearby bassinet, baby Grace began to fuss. Vanessa immediately picked her up and held her close. "They are never going to give up," she cried into her baby's blanket. "They will never ever stop trying to take you from me." An hour later, Detective Rivera was standing in their living room. Vanessa had called him as soon as she was able to speak. He held out his tablet, showing her a collection of photos that had been taken over the last week. "I have been keeping an eye on David," he said in a serious tone. "Your mother would have insisted that you know the truth. The pictures proved everything. There was David, secretly meeting Claudia at the coffee shop. There was another one of David meeting with Dr. Peterson at the hospital, and the worst one of all showed David going into Judge Morgan's private residence, not her public office. This whole reconciliation was a setup from the start, Rivera told her. They are going ahead with their plan to get emergency custody. The hearing is set for Friday at 2 in the afternoon. That is less than 48 hours from now. Vanessa felt a wave of nausea. But the Foundation's charity gala is Friday night at 7. Rivera nodded grimly. That is the whole point. They planned it so that you would have already lost custody of your daughter before you ever get the chance to tell your side of the story. If you wait until your gala to speak, they will already have Grace. You will just come across as a bitter ex-wife trying to spread lies. Can you not arrest them right now for conspiracy? We cannot do that without stronger evidence, he explained. These text messages are not enough. They can claim they were just kidding or that their words are being taken out of context. We need them to actually make their move. Just then, James arrived, and his face was grim. Judge Morgan has moved the hearing. It is now scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9. Sarah jumped out of her chair. They are moving up the timeline. Catherine then joined them on a video call. They know about the gala. They are trying to grab Grace before you have any chance to expose them. Vanessa's voice was soft and sounded completely defeated. So in just 12 hours, they are going to walk in here and take my baby, and there is nothing at all I can do to stop them. Late that night, Vanessa sat in the nursery's rocking chair, holding Grace while she slept. Sarah stood in the doorway watching her. Both women were exhausted, terrified, and had run out of options. I cannot let them take her from me. I just cannot. We will find a way to fight, Sarah insisted. James will figure something out. But James cannot fight a crooked judge, Vanessa replied. He cannot fight a fake medical diagnosis, and he cannot fight a legal system that is designed to protect powerful families like the Reynolds. Vanessa's voice started to rise with panic. I only have one choice left. I have to run away. Tonight is the night, she announced, pushing herself to her feet. I am taking Grace, and we are going to disappear. I will use my mother's money to make sure no one ever finds us. Sarah's face was a mask of horror. Vanessa, if you run away, they will call it kidnapping. You will be a fugitive. I do not care, Vanessa answered, her hands trembling as she began stuffing diapers into a bag. As long as Grace is safe, nothing else matters. We can escape to Canada and then go to Europe. We will find somewhere they can never find us. Sarah was completely torn. But you will spend your entire life looking over your shoulder. You will be teaching your daughter how to hide. That is not a life. It is much better than losing her, Vanessa sobbed. Just then, Grace woke up and started to cry. As Vanessa scooped her up, tears streamed down her own face. I am so sorry, my sweet baby girl. Mommy tried so hard to be strong, but sometimes running is the only choice to keep you safe. At that exact moment, a pair of headlights washed across the driveway. It was Detective Rivera and James Morrison, arriving for an urgent meeting at 2 o'clock in the morning. Everyone met in the living room, their faces marked with pure exhaustion and growing desperation. James carefully placed a thick, sealed envelope on the coffee table. Your mother wanted you to have this, he said softly. It was labeled, for when all else fails. With shaking hands, Vanessa tore it open. Inside, she found 6 USB drives, a letter from her mother, Margaret, and a thick pile of legal documents. She started to read the letter out loud, her voice cracking with emotion. My dearest girl, if you are reading this, I know it means they are trying to take Grace away from you. I am so very sorry that I am not there to protect you both, the letter read. But I did everything I could. During the last 6 months of my life, I hired Detective Rivera to place listening devices all through the Reynolds house. He had their permission, of course. What we did is probably not legal, and it is definitely not something you can use in a courtroom. But it is leverage. It is absolute leverage. These drives hold audio recordings of Linda and Robert planning to destroy you, planning to use David, and planning to take Grace from you. They planned every single step. You cannot use this in court, but you can use it to make them terrified. You can use it to force them into a corner. You can make them ruin themselves just by trying to hide what they have done. Trust your team, trust yourself, and trust that sometimes fighting dirty is the only way to protect what is most precious. I love you forever, Mom. Vanessa looked up at Detective Rivera, her eyes wide with shock. You put listening devices in their house? He simply nodded. Your mother hired me to install audio and video surveillance in every single room except for the bathrooms and bedrooms. We have 6 months of recordings. Catherine's voice suddenly came through the video call. Oh my gosh, James looked uncomfortable. This is ethically very complicated, but can we actually use it at the gala? You cannot present it in a court of law, Catherine explained, but there is nothing that says you cannot play it at a private event. The recordings belong to your mother. Now you have inherited them, Detective Rivera agreed. And as soon as it is made public, the district attorney will be forced to investigate. The public pressure will be overwhelming. But they are coming for Grace in 7 hours, Vanessa said, the feeling of hopelessness returning. The gala is not for another 12 hours. How does this help me right now? Catherine leaned forward, getting close to her camera. You do not show up for the hearing. Everyone in the room just stared at the screen. What? If you are not there, they cannot take Grace. The court will issue an order for contempt, but that takes time. While that is happening, you move forward with the gala tonight and expose everything. And then you turn yourself in, Catherine concluded. Sarah was horrified. She will be arrested. For what? For missing a hearing? Vanessa turned to look at James. What is the penalty for something like that? Contempt of court, he explained. It is usually just a fine, maybe a few days in jail. That is nothing compared to the pain of losing Grace. Rivera added his thoughts. And once those recordings are out in the open, the very judge who issued these warrants will be under investigation herself. She will not be able to rule against you. Vanessa looked down at Grace sleeping peacefully in her arms, and then at the faces of her team, her mother's team. So I hide for 12 hours, I skip the hearing, I attend the gala, and I reveal everything? Then I face whatever comes next, she said, finishing the thought. That is the plan. She looked directly at Rivera. But where can I possibly hide? I have a safe house, he answered. It is completely off the record. They will never think to look for you there. Vanessa looked at each person in the room, Sarah, James, Rivera, and Catherine on the screen. Every one of them was willing to risk it all for her and for Grace. This is completely insane, she whispered. Sarah gave her a gentle smile. Your mother prepared for this? My mother was insane, Vanessa shot back. Your mother was a genius, Catherine corrected her. It is time to make a choice, Vanessa. Vanessa stood tall, holding Grace tightly. Okay, let's do it, all of it. I am finished playing defense. She looked each of them in the eye, a new determination burning within her. Let's show them exactly what happens when you threaten a Lawson woman's child. The grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel was sparkling under the light of enormous crystal chandeliers. 800 guests, all in their most elegant evening wear, chatted and mingled. The media was present in full force, with cameras flashing, capturing every single moment. A large banner hung overhead that read, Margaret Lawson Foundation Inaugural Gala. Displays were set up around the room detailing the foundation's future work, building women's shelters, funding legal aid clinics, and creating education programs. It all seemed legitimate because it was. This was real work that was meant to continue long after this night was over. The Reynolds family made their grand entrance at 7 p.m. They looked like they owned the world. Linda wore expensive pearls and an expression of smug confidence, while Robert looked sharp in his tailored suit. David stood right between them, looking as if he had already won. They were confident that victory was theirs. Vanessa had not shown up at the court hearing that morning. A warrant had been issued for her arrest for contempt of court, and Child Protective Services had been given temporary custody of Grace. The baby was supposed to be in protective care while the legal system figured things out. What they had no way of knowing was that Grace was perfectly safe and hidden away with Detective Rivera, and Vanessa was getting ready for the single most important performance of her life. At that moment, Claudia walked out of the restroom. She was no longer trying to hide in the shadows. She walked directly up to David and, in front of everyone, placed a hand on her flat stomach. Her stomach was completely flat, even though she was supposed to be 7 months pregnant. Of course, there was no baby bump because there was no baby. There never had been. Reporters immediately swarmed Mr. Reynolds, asking, "Is it true that there is a custody battle?" David's answer was smooth and rehearsed. "This is a private family matter. We are simply here tonight to show our support for the Margaret Lawson Foundation." They then went to their seats in the special section that Catherine had reserved for them, clearly believing in the old saying to keep your enemies close. At 7:30, the lights in the ballroom began to dim. A ripple of excited whispers went through the crowd as a single spotlight illuminated the main entrance. Vanessa Lawson made her entrance, but she was not alone. She was holding Grace, who was now 3 months old, and looking around the room with big, curious eyes. Vanessa was wearing a beautiful designer gown and held her head high, with Sarah and Detective Rivera walking on either side of her. The detective's badge was polished and clearly visible. The entire ballroom fell into a deep, stunned silence. David shot to his feet, all the color draining from his face as he stammered, "How do you have her? There is a court order." Detective Rivera stepped forward and said calmly, "Mr. Reynolds, I would strongly advise you to take your seat." David did as he was told. Linda's face was a mixture of pure rage and panic. She had been so certain she was going to win. Vanessa walked onto the stage and gently handed Grace to Sarah, who stood at the side where everyone could see the baby. Grace was a living, breathing symbol of what this evening was really all about. Vanessa stepped up to the podium, and a large screen lowered from the ceiling behind her. She looked out at 800 faces, at the cameras broadcasting live to 50,000 people, and at the people in the front row who had tried to destroy her life. "Thank you all for joining me tonight," she started. Her voice was steady, clear, and filled with strength. 3 months of pain and careful planning had all come down to this one moment. 3 months ago, I laid my mother to rest at Oakland Cemetery. It was the worst day of my life, and not just because I lost the woman who raised me. It was also the day that my husband decided our marriage was finished. A quiet murmur moved through the audience. They all knew parts of this story from the news, but hearing it directly from her was something entirely different. He handed me divorce papers right there at her graveside, as they were lowering her casket into the ground, while the priest was still in the middle of a prayer. I was 7 months pregnant with his child at the time. Camera flashes erupted as reporters leaned forward. This was proving to be even more dramatic than any of them had hoped. "I am not telling you this to ask for your pity," she went on, "but to give you some context, because what happened next is a story about being underestimated. It is a story about people who see kindness and believe it is weakness. It is about the danger of assuming you really know what another person is capable of." With a single click, the screen behind her came to life, showing a professional photograph of Margaret, looking confident, intelligent, and powerful. My mother spent 30 years of her life building a secret fortune that absolutely no one knew about. She managed to acquire $500 million through smart investments, real estate deals, and various businesses. She lived a simple life, always worked behind the scenes, and she let everyone misjudge her. The screen then filled with numbers, property records, and investment reports. All of it was real and thoroughly documented. She did this because she understood a very important truth. The best way to protect yourself is to stay invisible until the moment you are ready to be seen. Vanessa paused to let the words sink in. She gave me everything, every last dollar and every piece of property. But she also left me something far more valuable. Another image appeared on the screen. She left me a plan, specific instructions, and all the evidence I would need. The evidence began to appear, and each new slide was more shocking than the one before it. The first section detailed David and Claudia's affair. Text messages appeared on screen dated 10 months before the funeral. There were hotel bills and photos of the two of them, proving their relationship began much earlier than David admitted. The ballroom filled with gasps. People twisted in their seats to stare at David, whose face had turned a deathly shade of white. "My husband did not simply leave me," Vanessa continued. He was manipulated into leaving me by a woman who saw him as a financial target. Next, the screen showed proof that Claudia's pregnancy was a complete lie. Her text messages with a friend were displayed for everyone. Claudia had typed, "The pregnancy angle is a sure thing. All it takes is a prosthetic belly and some fake ultrasound photos. He is too naive to question anything." Her friend replied, "What if he insists on coming to a doctor's appointment with you?" Claudia's confident response was, "I will think of something. Men like him only see the things they want to see." A wave of outrage swept through the room. The guests stared at Claudia, who was frozen in her seat, her face as pale as a ghost. Claudia Bennington is a professional con artist. She already has 7 fraud charges against her in 3 separate states. She is not pregnant. She has never been pregnant. David leaped from his chair, his face flushed with rage. "That is not true! She is pregnant with my child!" Detective Rivera stood up, his badge clearly visible. "Mr. Reynolds, either you take your seat or I will have you removed from the room." David slumped back down and turned to Claudia. "Is it true? Are you really not pregnant?" he asked. Claudia said nothing, but the guilt was written all over her face. The third exhibit was a payment from Linda. A bank transfer record appeared on the screen. It was a transfer from Linda Reynolds to Claudia Foster for $15,000, dated 3 weeks before Margaret's funeral. The memo simply said, "As we agreed." Vanessa stated calmly, "My mother-in-law paid off my husband's mistress. Linda had paid her $15,000 to guarantee that he would follow through with the divorce." Linda jumped to her feet and screamed, "These are lies and defamation. This is illegal. How did you get my private bank statements?" Vanessa replied, "Mrs. Reynolds, everything you see is legal and has been fully documented." The fourth piece of evidence exposed the reconciliation lie. Recent text messages between Linda and David filled the screen. Linda had written, "Has she gotten rid of the investigation files yet?" David had texted back, "I am making progress. I am slowly earning her trust." Linda pushed him, writing, "You need to work faster. As soon as that evidence is destroyed, we will take grace." The ballroom descended into total chaos. People were on their feet shouting while reporters scrambled to broadcast the news. Cameras flashed from every direction, capturing the Reynolds family's stunning and very public downfall. 2 weeks ago, Vanessa said, her voice now cold and hard, David approached me and begged for a second chance. He asked to be a father to Grace again. A part of me wanted to believe he had changed. But it was nothing more than a trap. The entire thing was a plot to make me destroy the evidence and to gain access to my daughter. Then she dropped the audio bomb. My mother anticipated this as well. For the last 6 months of her life, she had the Reynolds' house under surveillance. James stood up to offer a legal explanation. These audio recordings were obtained on private property with the express permission of the legal owner of that property. Margaret Lawson was a legal part owner of the Reynolds family residence through a trust, which makes this evidence completely admissible. It was a creative use of the law, but it sounded perfectly legitimate. I'm about to play 60 seconds of a recording. That is all the time you will need. A click was heard, and Linda's voice filled the ballroom, sharp and clear. After we get custody, we will control the girl's fortune through child support payments. David will receive millions. Then Robert's voice came on, and the girl will grow up believing her mother was nothing but a crazy woman. Linda spoke again. Precisely. We will make certain the world believes she was an unstable and unfit mother. We will tell everyone she had postpartum depression, that she was a danger to her own child. David's voice sounded hesitant. But what if she tries to fight back? Linda replied with confidence. Fight back with what? After you get her to destroy all the proof, she will be left with absolutely nothing. The recording stopped. The ballroom was in an absolute state of pandemonium. People were shouting everywhere. Reporters were rushing for the doors. Camera flashes went off like a lightning storm. Detective Rivera stepped up to the microphone. For the official record, I am Detective Michael Rivera from the Atlanta Police Department Financial Crimes Division. Everything you saw here tonight was submitted to the District Attorney's Office 48 hours ago. Arrest warrants were issued early this morning. At that moment, police officers entered the ballroom from multiple doors. We permitted this event to proceed because Mrs. Lawson wanted all of you, their friends and colleagues, to hear the unvarnished truth before they could create their own false story. The officers moved directly toward the Reynolds' table. David Reynolds, you are being placed under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted interference with child custody, and wire fraud. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed as they were placed on David's wrists. He just stared at Vanessa, completely stunned, as if he could not process that she had truly beaten him. Linda Reynolds, you are under arrest for filing false federal documents, bribery, conspiracy to commit kidnapping and obstruction of justice. Another set of handcuffs snapped closed. Linda's carefully constructed composure finally crumbled. She started to sob, with black mascara running down her cheeks. Robert Reynolds, you are under arrest for embezzlement, charity fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. Robert offered no resistance. He understood the game was over. Claudia Bennington, you are under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and extortion. Claudia made a desperate attempt to run, but officers easily blocked her exit. As they cuffed her, she shrieked, "He put me up to it. He was the one who promised me money." As David was being led out, he shouted back at her, "I never promised you a thing. We were partners in this." They were all escorted from the ballroom while the media captured every single moment. The scandal of the decade was unfolding for dozens of cameras. It was being broadcast live to an audience of thousands. The room was still filled with a tense, electric energy. Vanessa picked up the microphone for the last time, now holding her daughter Grace in her arms. The baby girl looked around at the flashing lights with big, curious eyes. "My mother always said that the best revenge is not found in anger. It is found in patience." She paused. She knew exactly what they were planning. She prepared for every possibility. And she taught me that real power is not about having money. It is about using your resources to protect the people that you love. She looked down at Grace. The Margaret Lawson Foundation will now be dedicated to supporting women who need help leaving abusive situations. It will help children who have no one else to fight for them, and it will help anyone who has ever been made to feel like they are not good enough. She paused for dramatic effect. And it will begin tonight with an initial endowment of $75 million. The applause was like thunder. The entire room rose to their feet. This was more than just justice. It was a charitable act. It was a kind of revenge that created something positive for the world. Vanessa looked directly at the cameras broadcasting her live. "They tried to bury me in the same grave as my mother." She let that sink in. "They must have forgotten that I am my mother's daughter, and I refuse to stay buried." The standing ovation was overwhelming. The media coverage was more massive than anything Catherine could have ever predicted. The story was guaranteed to be the lead headline for many weeks. Vanessa walked off the stage holding Grace, feeling the immense weight of the last few months finally disappear from her shoulders. It was done. It was truly and finally done. 6 months later, the final scenes of the drama unfolded in various courtrooms. David's sentencing came first. He stood there in a bright orange jumpsuit and chains, looking 20 years older than the man who had handed Vanessa divorce papers at her own mother's funeral. The judge's voice was firm. "Mr. Reynolds, you are hereby sentenced to 6 years in federal prison, which will be followed by 10 years of probation. Your parental rights have been terminated." The gavel banged down. As David was taken away, he glanced back one last time at Vanessa, who was watching from the gallery. She met his look without any expression. Not anger, not satisfaction, just a quiet sense of finality. Linda and Robert were sentenced in a separate courtroom. "Mrs. Reynolds, your sentence is 8 years in federal prison." Linda's perfect composure finally shattered into 1,000 pieces. She sobbed without restraint, her face a mess of ruined makeup. The woman who had orchestrated so much pain was now just a broken shell of a person whose desperate cries for mercy were ignored. "Mr. Reynolds, you are sentenced to 12 years in federal prison." Robert listened to the $3 million restitution order with a blank expression. He had known this day was coming. The news of the trial's conclusion spread everywhere. Every single member of the Reynolds family was convicted on all counts. For her role in the scheme, Judge Patricia Morgan was disbarred. Claudia Bennington was given a 5-year prison sentence. In its first 6 months of operation, the Margaret Lawson Foundation had already helped 15 families rebuild their lives. The whole story became a powerful inspiration. Every person who had ever been mistreated, lied to, or made to feel worthless saw a piece of their own fight in Vanessa's victory. The public support was incredible. 1 year after that now famous gala, Vanessa visited David in prison. She brought along photos of their daughter, Grace. The pictures showed a lovely little girl, already taking her first steps and forming her first sounds. The visitation room felt cold and impersonal. When David entered, he appeared much older, like a man who had lost all hope. He had been given plenty of time to think about his choices. Vanessa was the first to speak. She is walking now. She is also beginning to talk. She calls Sarah Auntie. Vanessa pushed the photos over the steel table. David's hands shook as he picked them up. Tears streamed down his face as he looked at the pictures. "She is absolutely beautiful," he said in a low voice. "She looks so much like you. She has your same eyes and your smile." Vanessa waited a second. "I brought these because I wanted you to see what you lost. My goal is not to be mean, but you need to understand the reality of it." "I do understand," he said, his voice sounding hollow. "I understand it every single day. I have terrible dreams about the cemetery, about that moment I gave you the papers. I wake up realizing I gave up everything important for a dream that was not even real." Vanessa watched him with a calm expression. "When you get out, if you are granted parole, you can legally ask the court for supervised visits. Maybe then, if you have really changed, if you have put in the effort, we can see what happens." His voice was almost inaudible. "Would you allow it?" Vanessa answered. "I cannot say. That is something to ask the Vanessa who is here 6 years in the future. The woman sitting here today simply wanted you to see your child, even if just in photographs." She rose from her chair to leave. "Vanessa," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I am so sorry. I know that saying it does not change anything. But I really am sorry." "I believe you are," she responded gently, "but apologies do not raise a daughter." "Goodbye, David." She walked out of the room without looking back. The chapter of her story was complete. Springtime came to Atlanta, filling the air with the scent of new blossoms and the music of birds. Vanessa guided a stroller down a walkway in Oakland Cemetery. Little Grace toddled next to her, taking unsteady but purposeful steps. They located Margaret's headstone, and Vanessa spread out a blanket. She sat with Grace, who right away began investigating the lawn and the flowers with a toddler's intense curiosity. "Hello, Mom," Vanessa said in a soft voice. "I know it has been some time." She tenderly placed a fresh bouquet of flowers into the vase by the stone. "The foundation opened its 4th shelter just last month. Sarah is running all the operations these days. She is amazing at her work. We have helped more than 2,000 families so far." Grace made happy sounds while tugging on a piece of grass. "Grace is on her feet now, although it is more like wobbling. She is very determined, you know. I wonder where that comes from." Vanessa stopped for a moment, overcome with feeling. "David is serving his time. He writes letters, but I have not replied. Perhaps when she is older, Grace will want to meet him. That choice will be up to her." Grace walked over to the grave marker and placed her small hands on the cool surface. "There is something else I wanted to share," Vanessa went on. "I do not feel angry anymore. I used to imagine that winning would feel like some huge triumph. Instead, it just feels peaceful. It feels like I can take a full breath at last." She saw her daughter discovering her surroundings without a hint of fear. "You left me something much greater than money, Mom. You gave me the knowledge that I was worth defending. You showed me that Grace was worth the fight." Her voice shook just a little. "I think about you all the time. I really wish you were here to watch her grow. I wish you could see all that we have accomplished." At that moment, Grace made her way back and tumbled into Vanessa's lap with a laugh. "Say hello to Grandma Margaret," Vanessa whispered. Grace waved her little hand toward the headstone and then turned her gaze to Vanessa. "Mama," she said, her first word coming out perfectly clear. Vanessa was stunned, and happy tears ran down her cheeks. "Yes, my sweet girl. Mama, I am your mama." She held Grace in a tight embrace. "And Grandma Margaret is looking out for the two of us." The second yearly gala for the Margaret Lawson Foundation was nothing like the first one. It was a smaller, more intimate affair with 200 attendees instead of 800. The women and children who received help from the foundation were the special guests. Their actual faces and personal stories of overcoming hardship were the main event. Vanessa stepped onto the stage carrying a confidence that was born from adversity. Grace was behind the stage with Sarah, and her picture was shown on a large screen. It was a purposeful reminder of the first gala, but now it represented happiness, not a need for validation. Last year, Vanessa started, we put on a gala that got a lot of attention for the wrong things. Tonight, I hope we get attention for all the right things. The audience laughed with a warm and sincere sound. The Margaret Lawson Foundation has assisted 21 families this year alone. We have started 4 shelters and 3 legal aid offices. We have also given educational grants to 300 women who are starting new lives. The screen in the background displayed the faces of everyday people, not famous ones. It featured women who had escaped from harmful situations and children who had discovered a secure home. These were families who were given an opportunity for a new beginning. My mother showed me that real strength is not about getting everyone's attention, it is about being prepared. But she also showed me that after a battle, you have to create something new. After you succeed, you have to recover. And after you make it through, you must help other people make it through. She raised her glass. To Margaret Lawson, who showed me that the greatest revenge is not about ruining your opponents. It is about creating something so wonderful and secure that they are unable to harm it. The clapping was sincere and full of feeling. This evening was not focused on gossip or controversy. It was focused on the meaningful work that was moving forward, expanding, and changing lives for the better. Later in the evening, Vanessa brought a sleeping Grace upstairs to her room. She carefully laid her daughter down in her crib. She tucked a soft blanket around her. On the wall hung framed photos of 3 generations of powerful women, Margaret holding a newborn Vanessa, and Vanessa holding a newborn Grace. It represented a heritage of resilience, handed from a mother to her child, and then to her grandchild. Vanessa softly touched every picture. We succeeded, Mom. We are out of danger. We are resilient. We are using your inheritance just like you hoped we would. She went to the window and gazed out at the sprawling property. The lights of the city sparkled far away. Her mother's voice felt like an echo in her thoughts, phrases she recalled from letters, from past moments, from a whole life of guidance. My dearest daughter, if you are hearing my voice, it means you made it through. You struggled and you were victorious. Now comes the most difficult part, figuring out how to live without resentment. Do not allow your influence to trap you. Use that influence to create something wonderful. Let Grace see what real courage is. I love you more than I can ever express. I am so very proud of the person you are now. Vanessa shut her eyes and one tear rolled down her cheek. It was a tear of letting go, not of sorrow. She opened her eyes and gazed at Grace one final time. Her daughter was in a deep sleep with no knowledge of the conflicts that were waged to keep her safe. She was not aware of the huge enterprise created to protect her future, or of the grandmother who had prepared for every outcome. All right, Mom, Vanessa whispered to herself. I am prepared. She switched off the light and went down the hall with a self-assured walk. She was no longer running away from her problems. She was not battling shadows from her history. She was just living her life, creating a legacy, and being the parent, the benefactor, and the powerful woman Margaret taught her to be. For a second, her mind's eye stayed on the nursery door, and then on the picture of Margaret, whose gaze seemed to have a wise expression, a look that approved of the final result. Grace Lawson, who was now 7 years old, sat in her mother's study working on her school assignments. Math equations were laid out on the table before her, but her eyes kept drifting up to a picture on the wall. It was a black and white photograph of a woman she had never seen in person, yet she felt a strange connection to her. Mama, she questioned, can you tell me the story of Grandma Margaret one more time? Vanessa glanced up from her laptop where she was looking over proposals for the foundation. She gave a warm smile, shut the computer, and moved to sit next to her child. "Your grandmother," she started, "was the most intelligent individual I have ever met. She realized something extremely significant. She knew that when people misjudge you, it is an advantage, not a weakness." Grace seemed puzzled. "What does misjudge mean?" "It means that other people believe you are not capable of doing something," Vanessa clarified. "They assume you are not clever enough or tough enough or worthy enough." Vanessa softly moved a strand of Grace's hair back from her face. "Your grandmother allowed people to believe those things about her, and while they were not focused on her, she created a massive enterprise." Grace's eyes grew large with wonder. "Like a princess has?" Vanessa smiled. "It was much better than a princess. She was more like a queen who created her very own kingdom instead of inheriting it." Grace considered this for a second. "Is that the reason we have the foundation? From what Grandma created?" "That is precisely the reason," Vanessa confirmed. "Your grandmother created it so we could be there for people who are facing terrible challenges. We offer support so they do not have to endure their struggles alone. It is just like how Uncle James and Aunt Catherine supported you." Vanessa's face softened at the sound of their names. James Morrison and Catherine Blake had truly become family. They were a cherished uncle and aunt who had supported them through the most difficult times. "Exactly," Grace agreed. "And it is like how Aunt Sarah helps you. When people are lonely and afraid, having someone believe in them can make all the difference in the world." Grace then went back to her math homework, tackling the problems with intense concentration. That determined expression reminded Vanessa so much of Margaret, and it made her heart ache in a sweet, happy way. The Margaret Lawson Foundation had blossomed into something bigger than Vanessa could have ever imagined. It currently operated 7 shelters across 3 different states. It also ran legal clinics in 5 separate cities. The educational programs had helped more than 500 women complete their degrees or earn new certifications. The foundation was now seen as a leading example for others. It was a perfect model of how inherited wealth could be used to make a genuine, lasting impact. Sarah Mitchell was in fact the chief operating officer now. She had left her nursing job to manage the foundation full-time, and she was absolutely amazing at it. She had a special talent for being both compassionate and incredibly organized, which made everything run smoothly. Detective Michael Rivera was now Captain Rivera. He still visited from time to time just to see how they were doing. He was no longer there in an official capacity, but as a trusted friend who had helped them navigate their darkest hours. Catherine Blake continued to oversee the investment portfolio with the same brilliant strategy that Margaret had always used. Under her skillful management, the original $500 million had increased to more than $700 million. This impressive growth provided even more funding for the foundation's vital mission. James Morrison remained their lawyer and reliable advisor. His role had shifted from fighting legal disputes to overseeing the estate and the foundation's legal matters. Now in his mid-60s, he was beginning to consider retirement. However, he was not quite prepared to step away from the family he had fought so hard to keep safe. The Reynolds family, by contrast, had completely crumbled. David was in prison for 4.5 years before being released for good behavior. He found a job in a warehouse. He was required to attend therapy and made sure to pay his child support on time. Vanessa put that money directly into a secure trust fund she created just for Grace. He wrote her letters for years, sending one after another. Vanessa saved all of them but never once wrote back. That part of her life was over, perhaps forever. Linda Reynolds was released from prison after serving a 6-year sentence. She ended up in a small, lonely apartment. Her own son refused to speak to her, holding her responsible for the family's downfall. The very same high society that had once celebrated her now shunned her completely. Her husband, Robert Reynolds, suffered a fatal heart attack 3 years into his prison term. David was allowed to go to the funeral, but he was escorted by guards. Linda attended all by herself. The once mighty family empire was now nothing more than a ruin. Claudia Bennington was in prison for 3 years, And then she disappeared with a brand new identity. Captain Rivera occasionally heard rumors about new scams that had her signature style. It was clear she had learned to be more discreet. But some people never truly change. Judge Patricia Morgan was stripped of her license to practice law. She was swamped with civil suits from the families whose lives she had destroyed. Her name had become a well-known symbol of corruption. Justice took its time, but it had finally been served. For Grace's 7th birthday, Vanessa brought her to the cemetery. It was not a somber visit, but a cherished tradition they had started together. They would bring flowers and tell stories, making sure Margaret's memory stayed bright and present in their lives. Grace, bubbling with the energy only a child has, ran ahead to the gravestone. She gently set down a bouquet of cheerful sunflowers. "Hello, Grandma Margaret. I am 7 years old today. Mommy says that 7 is a very special number." Vanessa walked up a moment later, holding a blanket and a picnic basket. They sat down on the grass beside the grave, sharing sandwiches and birthday cake and talking about everything big and small. "Mommy, do you think Grandma Margaret would be proud of me?" Vanessa pulled Grace into a warm hug. "I am certain she is. She would be so amazed by how smart you are, and by how thoughtful you are, and how much you want to help people who are struggling." "Like the kids who live at our shelter?" Grace asked. "Yes, exactly like them," Vanessa said with a smile. Grace was quiet for a second before saying something that filled Vanessa's heart with emotion. "When I am a grown-up, I want to help people just like you and Grandma Margaret did. I want to make sure that nobody ever has to feel alone when they are going through something awful." Tears started to form in Vanessa's eyes. "In that case, that is exactly what you are going to do." 3 generations of Lawson women. Margaret had built the foundation, Vanessa had guarded and expanded it, and now Grace was ready to carry on the tradition, not out of obligation, but from a genuine passion to continue the meaningful work. Later that evening, they hosted a small birthday celebration at the estate. Sarah attended with her girlfriend of 2 years, and seeing Sarah so happy warmed Vanessa's heart after all she had done for them. James and Catherine showed up bearing gifts. Captain Rivera also made an appearance with his own family. More friends from the foundation, from Grace's school, and from the new life they'd created all came to join the festivities. As the celebration wound down and the guests started to head home, Grace drifted off to sleep on the sofa, exhausted from the day's excitement. Vanessa gently carried her up to her room and tucked her into bed. She lingered for a moment, simply watching her daughter's calm, sleeping face. She thought about the person she used to be 7 years ago. She was pregnant, grieving her mother, and reeling from a profound betrayal. She had stood at her mother's grave while her husband was actively trying to ruin her. That version of herself had felt so utterly lost and defeated. She had been convinced that everything good in her life had vanished forever. She could not have imagined this reality, the inner strength she would find, the powerful organization she would lead, the justice she would secure, the foundation she would build, and the kind, confident daughter she would raise. But her mother, Margaret, had seen it all. She had planned for every bit of it. Margaret had provided every single resource Vanessa would require and had left behind perfectly clear directions. "Thank you, Mom," Vanessa whispered softly in the silent room. "Thank you for all of it. For seeing a future that I was blind to. For knowing I was strong enough when I had no faith in myself. For showing me that patience is a true power and that living a wonderful life is the ultimate victory." She turned to go but stopped at the door. There was one last thing she needed to say. "And thank you for Grace. Thank you for giving me a reason to fight when all I wanted to do was give up. Thank you for making sure your granddaughter would always feel safe, cherished, and strong." The house was peaceful as the night grew deeper. Vanessa went down to the library, poured herself a cup of tea, and sat down at her mother's desk. It was the exact same desk where she had found that first letter, the one that unlocked the entire mystery. Now, a new letter rested on the desk, one she was in the middle of writing to Grace. She intended for Grace to open it on her 18th birthday. Vanessa lifted her pen to add more. "My darling Grace, If you are reading this, it means you are about to begin your life as an adult. By this time, you have heard the complete story of your grandmother Margaret and how she built a secret empire, and how she used that empire to shield me when I was at my most vulnerable. But the thing you may not fully understand yet is the greatest lesson she ever gave me, a lesson that I am now trying to give to you. Wealth is not defined by the money in your bank account. Power is not measured by how many people you have authority over, and success is not about getting even with your enemies. The true measure of a good life is found in how many people are better off because you existed. It is about how many lives you made better and how much sadness you were able to transform into hope. Your grandmother did not build a fortune just to be wealthy. She built it to serve as a defense for the people she cared about and as a source of help for those who were struggling. She did it to show that a woman who everyone wrote off as a mere bookkeeper could actually make a difference in the world. I inherited her wealth, but more importantly, I inherited her purpose, and now I am passing them both on to you. I want you to see this as a gift of possibilities, not a heavy burden. You are not required to run the foundation if that is not what you dream of doing. You have the freedom to be whoever you want and do whatever you choose. Your inheritance gives you that choice, but I truly hope that you will decide to continue this legacy, not because you feel you have to, but because you understand. As your grandmother and I both learned, protecting and lifting up other people is the most meaningful work a person can do. I want you to hold on to 3 lessons forever. First, your greatest strength will be when people underestimate you. Let them misjudge you. Then you can show them how wrong they were by accomplishing more than they ever thought possible. Second, patience will be your most effective tool. Do not ever make decisions based on anger. Instead, create a careful plan, prepare yourself, and act only when the time is right, not when your feelings are running high. And third, the greatest revenge of all is to create a life so beautiful, so positive, and so impactful that your enemies look back and realize they only managed to destroy themselves when they misjudged you. You are the greatest happiness I have ever known, Grace. It has been the privilege of my life to watch you grow into this wonderful, caring, and incredibly smart young woman. No matter what path you choose or where life takes you, I want you to always remember that both of your grandmothers are so very proud of you. Margaret, the grandmother you never met, loved you so dearly that she prepared for your future long before you were born. And I am the fortunate one who gets to see you become the remarkable person I always knew you would be. The women in the Lawson family are strong, we overcome, we carry on, and we flourish. We never, ever let anyone hold us back. With all my love, now and forever, Mom. Vanessa set the pen down. She sealed the envelope and carefully placed the letter inside the safe. It would stay there until Grace turned 18. She switched off the library lights and made her way through the silent house for a final check. She tested the locks and turned off the remaining lamps, preparing for the day ahead. Tomorrow she would meet with investors who wanted to help her foundation expand across the world. The next day, a board meeting was scheduled to approve 3 new shelters, and the following week, she was set to give a speech at a conference about empowering women who have overcome deep pain. The mission was endless. It was Margaret's mission, passed down to Vanessa, and one day it would be passed to Grace. Their legacy was not about revenge, but about resilience. It was not focused on tearing things down, but on building things up. It was not about clinging to anger, but about transforming it into something good. Vanessa paused before the large portrait of Margaret that hung in the hallway. Her mother's painted eyes seemed to look down at her with pride, with love, and with the quiet contentment of a mission fulfilled. We did it, Mom. We are more than just okay. We are precisely the women you taught us to be. She climbed the stairs and looked in on Grace one last time. Her daughter was sleeping peacefully, completely safe in a home built by her grandmother's genius and her mother's courage. And so Vanessa Lawson, who once stood broken beside a grave, left with nothing but her sorrow and a feeling of bitter betrayal, finally slept in a house that was now full of love. She was surrounded by the proof that strength can be inherited, that justice can be found, and that a woman who is counted out is the most powerful person in the world. The story that began with ashes and concluded with an empire had reached its end. But the legacy, the real legacy, would now carry on for many more generations to come.